continues.
George Chalink, tell us, how much did Congress provide this year for defense spending?
Congress passed last week a conference report for a $447.6 billion defense spending bill that also includes about $70 billion for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Why is the money for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan separate from the defense bill itself?
Well, it's been a contentious issue between Congress and the administration, actually. What's happened is the administration has taken to providing a second budget, a supplemental budget, they call it, every spring, that outlines their war costs. In addition to that, Congress now has added some additional money in a bridge fund to help the military get through the year until they can get to next spring, when a new request for war funding will come from the administration.
So is this $70 billion a part of the supplemental from the last fiscal year, or is this something that's going to be included in the next, or is just kind of a something to tide us over?
Yeah, it's for 2007. It's going to be at the end of 2007. Right now, for the first part of 2007, they'll use a supplemental that was passed earlier this year for most of 2007. Then $70 billion will tide them over for the rest of the year.
And tell us, of the $448 billion, where is most of that money going?
Most of it, well, about $120 billion goes towards operation and maintenance. That's keeping tanks running, planes flying, ships steaming. About $80 billion goes towards military procurement, $75 billion towards military research, development, and test and evaluation, and about $86 billion for military personnel, paying salaries for uniformed militaries as well as Defense Department civilians.
We're talking with George Chalink, Congressional Quarterly Reporter, about the $448 billion defense bill passed last week before Congress went out for the elections in November. If you want to get involved in the conversation, the number is 202-737-0001 for Republicans, 202-737-0002 for Democrats, and 202-628-0205 for Independents. What were some of the more contentious items in the budget?
Well, the $70 billion definitely grew. It was originally expected to be about $50 billion, and lawmakers, when they went to negotiate the final bill, they added $20 billion, so that certainly surprised a lot of people. Some of the spending on weapons issues is always contentious. Some programs were scaled back. They scaled back, for example, the Joint Strike Fighter. The Pentagon wanted to build 5 of those aircraft in 2007. They're only going to get 2. Things like that were contentious. Military pay raise, some folks had sought for a higher pay raise, but they came in at 2.2% for the military.
And some of that $70 billion, I understand that the way it's written, that none of that money can be used to on permanent military facilities in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Right, that's a significant change. This is the first time an annual appropriations bill has had that provision. It's basically would bar using any U.S. dollars to establish permanent U.S. military bases in Iraq. And this is something that lawmakers wanted to send the message that we're not there to create a permanent presence in Iraq.
Were there specific lawmakers that wanted this in the bill, that made sure, you know, we got to have this in there?
It was pushed by the Democrats. Some of the Democrats, including John Murtha, had actually pushed for a provision that would bar any U.S. funding for any U.S. bases in Iraq. So this was sort of a compromise. It says no permanent U.S. bases. It gives the administration a little bit wiggle room there to have bases. They can say they're temporary and not permanent, but keep them in place.
Falls Church, Virginia, you're on with George Chalink. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Fine. What's your question, sir?
Well, I wanted to point out that what is happening is what Eisenhower said to warn us about. The defense industrial economic powers have taken over the government. The war in Iraq is the first war that was fought specifically for the spoils. The defense budget, if it was spent humanely, could end hunger, end illiteracy, end disease for treatable diseases, could invest in all the things that the world needs instead of investing in death.
Did you want to comment on this?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a big budget. It's the largest annual discretionary spending bill that Congress passes, so there's certainly a lot of money there. But there is also some money in there for non-Iraq things. For example, there's $20 million in there for peacekeeping efforts in the Sudan. So it's not just all Iraq money that's in this bill.
Next up is Houston, Texas, on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like your guest to go ahead and discuss how much money and whatnot that they've devoted towards TRICARE.
For TRICARE, well, it's all part of that $86 billion for personnel. One of the interesting things on TRICARE this time, which is the military's health care system, is there was an attempt to try to sort of raise some of the premiums and change how retail prescriptions were done for military members. They would have been forced to go to a mail order system versus being able to use traditional pharmacies. Those provisions did not go through, nor did the proposed TRICARE increase on copays. So TRICARE for military members stayed about the same. It's a big concern at the Pentagon because they feel that personnel costs are eating up a disproportionate share of the budget.
Norwalk, Connecticut, on our line for Independence. You're on with George Chalink.
Good morning, Rob, and good morning, George.
Good morning.
Yes. I don't like this idea of putting any money really into defense right now. I think it's just keeping GWB in office, which is preposterous and ridiculous, because what should be done right now. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can. Go right ahead.
It's hard to. Okay. I think what should be done right now, before the elections, November elections, I think hearings should be held ASAP with GWB present, and he should be made to swear under oath, okay? And question about torture, his role in wiretapping, especially about Iraq. And I would like to see Robert Fisk, who was the person who was replaced by the pervert Ken Starr, to go after Bush. And you know what? I am very sorry I didn't vote for Dennis Kucinich, because I saw him on the floor saying that we're getting ready to go into Iran now.
The passage of these bills, the House passed the defense bill last Tuesday, 394 to 22. The Senate voted on it on Friday, 100 to nothing. What kind of indication is that getting this thing passed, getting the defense bill passed, is part of a plan to help folks when they go and campaign in November?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with it. It's very difficult for a lawmaker of either party these days to vote against the defense bill, because we do have a war going on. Nobody wants to see like they oppose the troops. One of the interesting things that you did see in the Senate, though, was their attempt in the Senate to attach a resolution to this bill that would have essentially called for President Bush to fire his defense secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. It didn't get a vote. It was blocked on procedure. But it did sort of show the partisan overtones to this bill, and it was how some Democrats thought they could make their point and voice dissatisfaction with the war without seeming like they were cutting spending for troops.
Were there any earmarks in this bill?
There were, as always, there was a ton. Depending upon who you talk to, they either ranged from $6.7 billion to $11 billion, and they ranged from $2.1 billion for cargo aircraft to $1 million for a study in Hawaii to see if you can convert waves into energy.
And whose whose earmarks were these?
Well, earmarks are always a touchy thing to tell, but the $2.1 billion was supposedly had some strong support from folks out in California and Missouri, including Jim Talent, who's a senator in a tough re-election. The plane's manufactured in California and Missouri. And then the $1 million for the wave study, that was Senator Daniel Inouye. He's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Tampa, Florida, on our line for Republicans. You're on with George Chalink of Congressional Quarterly.
Yes, hi. Basically, I'm concerned about fiscal responsibility, and as a fiscal conservative, I want to know how long we can sustain budget deficits going just year after year. When the United States has already become the largest debtor in the nation. And what's going to happen with the dollar as the administration continues to encourage it to be devalued, in order and foreign countries decide not to purchase our bonds anymore because their rate of return is effectively being lost.
In terms of the defense spending, how much of that goes into increasing or decreasing the debt?
Well, it's all discretionary spending, so it does all count in the budget resolutions, and it sort of does add up over time.
Santa Cruz, California, you're on the Washington Journal. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. A couple of questions. One is that, this budget has gotten so huge now, and it's increasing every year. How much larger is it now than the Clinton years?
Oh, I would estimate in the neighborhood of about $100 billion. Obviously, a lot of that is war money.
For Iraq, then, and
Yeah.
Afghanistan. So, and then also, when we spend this huge amount, and for now till 2007, you said, and it's equipment, technology, and what happens when this equipment doesn't get used? Or, we have stockpiles all over the country for vehicles and warfare that are never going to be used. Do we sell them to other countries?
Well, I think the military would disagree with you on the equipment not being used. A lot of the money in this budget is to replace and repair equipment that's been lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. Certainly there are some stockpiles that we keep stateside for National Guard emergencies, things like that. But the military would tell you right now they don't have a lot of extra equipment that they need all this money to buy and repair new equipment because it's being lost to the wars.
Next up is Commerce, Texas, on our line for Independence. Good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal.
Good morning. Thank
Good morning.
you. My question is, with this largest sum of money, what is the oversight that has been put in place? Previously, we have had millions and now even billions of dollars that have come up missing, and there's absolutely no idea. No one has any idea where the money went, where it is. Actually, I suppose it's been stolen. I don't know, but it's unaccounted for. And I'd like to know what has been put in place, oversight has been put in place to assure the American people that this money doesn't come up missing.
Well, oversight's not always a concern. Congress always, as they craft the annual budget, they hold a number of hearings, a number of meetings with Pentagon folks. I think one of the changes you're going to actually see next year, as we talked about, the administration coming to Congress with supplementals for war spending. Next year, actually, the administration is required to include war funding in their annual budget request. And one of the reasons that lawmakers say they want to do that is that they can have more hearings specifically into the war funding and discuss that issue as they craft the overall budget.
Talk to me about the numbers, the cost of replacing National Guard and reserve equipment that's been lost in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how much of that is in this budget.
It's a huge number. The National Guard and reserves have been some of the folks who have been deployed and trained the most, and traditionally their equipment has been the oldest. The active duty force usually gets no equipment, so there's $2.9 billion in this budget to start replacing National Guard and reserve force equipment.
Pensacola, Florida, good morning.
Yes, can you hear me?
I sure
Yep.
can. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, I'd just like to say two things in regards to George Bush giving money to other nations to hurt us.
Ma'am, could you turn on your mute so we don't get that echo back there?
Yeah, I wonder where my radio's off.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me turn this off. Okay, hey, in regards to, did you hear the first? Let me
Yes.
say it again.
Yeah.
George Bush, undercover, is sneaking around and giving to a lot of nations over yonder that's doing the garbage. It's doing the garbage to us.
Mm-hmm.
And he's hired a lot of sort of, I don't know what you call the people in Washington. They said communists or whatever you call them. Hey, I'm serious now.
We're going to move on to Memphis, Tennessee. Good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal.
Hello.
Memphis, you're on.
Yeah, we're spending, during the defense appropriations, we give tons of money to some of the airlines, especially a cargo airline in Tennessee, aligned with the president. And for the civilian reserve air fleet, why can't these airplanes be used for things like Katrina and so forth? Why don't these companies, they're paying for cargo doors and tremendous amounts of equipment on these airplanes. Why can't they be used for other things other than for maybe there's a war?
Mr. Chalink.
Well, I think that a lot of domestic carriers and things like that probably did help out during Katrina, providing some support. But there definitely are provisions that allow the Defense Department to pay commercial carriers to ferry troops and things overseas. And the Defense Department argues that that's a less expensive option than maintaining a larger fleet of aircraft than they already have.
George Chalink covers defense for Congressional Quarterly. Previously, he covered Congress for Defense Daily, and also covered military operations in the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, and Kosovo, and was an embedded reporter at the start of the Iraq War for National Journal magazine. He's a graduate of St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. Next up is Aransas Pass, Texas. Is that right?
Good morning. Yes, it's Aransas Pass.
Aransas Pass. Go ahead.
Two questions. One, is it possible to find out what the budget was for a certain item in 1987? In 1987, I recruited to work for a company that did the warhead manning for Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and it's never become public. We managed all of the warheads, chemical, biological, and nuclear environment for Saddam Hussein, and I've never heard this discussed. I just need to get a little background information.
Well, there certainly are classified portions of the defense budget, so perhaps the numbers are still classified. I'm not familiar with that particular program, though, but it's a massive budget, and it's hard to sometimes pin down what they're spending on what items.
And for people who wanted to look at the unclassified or the declassified parts of the defense budget, where would they go? They
could go on Thomas. The Library of Congress's website should have a report up.
King George, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning. I have two questions. One is how much of this budget is being spent on SDI? And the other question is, without congressional oversight, is there an audit of this money being spent?
Well, SDI, I think you're referring to missile defense initiatives. There's about $9.4 billion in this budget for missile defense. It's 14% of all the research and development money in this budget. And it's the $9.4 billion is about what the Bush administration requested for missile defense. The second question you asked about auditing, the Government Accountability Office regularly audits federal agencies, and interestingly enough, to underscore your point perhaps, the Defense Department is one of the few government agencies that never comes up with a clean audit. They can't quite balance their books. Part of the problem is just a variety of different accounting systems and the volume of money that they deal with, but that might get to your point a little bit about that there's nobody who totally can get their hands around all the numbers in the defense budget.
Brookline, Massachusetts, you're on the Washington Journal. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Elaine Schneider, and I'm calling because 50 years ago, actually between 1953 and 54, I worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and I worked for 10 men, and yet within a short period of time after I got things organized, I had to spend half the day hand-carrying papers around in order to fill up an 8-hour day. And when I left, I said, well, you can get rid of my job and all of these 10 men, because there's nothing that we're really doing here, and it's such a waste of money. And they said, Elaine, we never cut. We just never cut the budget regardless. So I'm wondering who takes a real close look at the oversight. Who is the oversight committee that takes care of looking at the waste of money? I had such a hard time paying taxes since 1954 because of all the waste I saw up close and personal at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Well, you have both the House Armed Services and the Senate Armed Services Committee certainly hold a number of hearings throughout the year on defense issues. And then there's also on the House Appropriations and Senate Appropriations, there's defense subcommittees that oversee these issues in Congress. Then, of course, as you go through the annual budget process, the Pentagon itself has multiple levels of reviews and ways of trying to check spending and avoid wasteful spending. But I think the point you make is right. In such a big budget, it's almost impossible to ferret out all waste.
How long does it take them to put together the budget for the Defense Department, and how many pages is that?
Well, that's a good question. They actually the budget that they're going to come up in January and propose for 2008 in the President's State of the Union, the Defense Department is just putting the finishing touches on that now. So almost a year and a half out, they finalize it, and they're probably working on it for the past 6 or 8 months. The Pentagon always seems to be doing some sort of budget drills. It's a few inches thick, the budget, when you see it. It's a hefty document.
Next up is Ottumwa, Iowa. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I've been interested in the budget deficit this year and did quite a bit of research online. I find it phenomenal that the budget deficit is really a total falsity. If you really want to know what's going on, you have to get a hold of the Financial Treasuries Report. Congress gets that every year. They mandated it. What's happening with the budget deficit is there are so many things they do not include in that, including a lot of what we spend for the war. And the Republican Party tries to use that budget deficit to make it look like their tax cuts are working, when that's a total falsity. They don't include what they take out of the Social Security trust funds, the Medicare trust funds, a lot of the military spending. You need to get on Representative Cooper from Tennessee. He's one of the Blue Dog Democrats. He did commentary on...
Thanks, ma'am, for your call. We're running out of time.
Well, I think that the point that there is a lot of war spending is relevant. There's $70 billion in there for the war. And I think a lot of that money as emergency spending does not count as part of discretionary spending caps that Congress has to abide by. So there is a sense, I think, in Congress that the war funding, they can sort of add to that without really falling under congressional budget cap requirements.
What's been the supplemental request, say, for the last 3 years from the administration? What do they anticipate the supplemental is going to be for next year?
Well, I can tell you since 2001, they're now over $500 billion. So over $500 billion since 2001 has been spent on Afghanistan and Iraq and sort of the global war on terrorism. The next supplemental request will come up in the spring. It's hard to predict what it will be.
What was it last year?
It ended up around $90 billion, I believe, and there was some money added onto it that might have been non-defense related as well.
Have they been steadily increasing?
Fairly steadily increasing, yeah.
Next up is Hamburg, New York. Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. One time I said to Senator Domenici, our senior senator from New Mexico, that corporations have to present an annual report to their stockholders, and I believe that every federal agency and bureau and department should present an annual report to taxpayers. And he said, government doesn't work that way. Well, it ought to work that way. Thank you very much.
Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's not a bad idea. You know, Congress, when they pass this legislation, they always do attach reports to them. And the reports are a good way of sort of Congress's annual reviews, annual assessments of a lot of the programs and where they're headed. So it might not be a corporate annual report, but Congress certainly weighs in a report with the legislation outlining what they think the priorities should be, problem areas, things like that.
Hamburg, New York, on our line for Democrats. Go ahead.
Yeah, with the budget they have for the war and Iraq and those places, whatnot, I think they have a big problem. Why don't they put something in there for conservation for the CCs, that they clean up the forest and we wouldn't have all the forest fires that we're having now?
Well, I think that, actually there is some firefighting money in this defense budget. There's a couple $100 million that was added to the defense budget for fighting forest fires. The reason being that the defense bill was one of the only bills that lawmakers passed before they went home for midterm elections, and there was some firefighting needs out west, and they did provide some money there. So there are some non-defense things in here. Most of the money for what you're talking about, conservation programs, though, that's going to come in other appropriations bills for other non-defense agencies.
What are some of the other non-defense spending issues that are in the bill that somebody might be surprised to see?
Well, I think that the main thing is a lot of the research and development programs, like we were mentioning, $1.1 million to study waves. There's $5.5 billion in there for the Air Force Academy to buy and install a new telescope. A lot of universities receive grant money to study different things in this budget, and it's not always clear what the link is to the Defense Department.
Thank you very much. George Chalink is with Congressional Quarterly. Thank you very much for being on the program.
Thanks. It was nice to be here.
And thank you for watching this edition of the Washington Journal. We'll be back again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern.